Okay, so put it on speaker view. What I would like to do is talk about some of my research. As many of you know, I've done some research on the history and usage of the N-word. First of all, let me just, I'm going to share my screen here so you can see. So the title of the talk is The Recency Illusion. Why it's not true that the N-word has been recently reclaimed as a term of endearment by Black folks. So why am I doing this research? Well, first of all, when I first started to do this, I noticed that there wasn't very much written about the N-word, or its history or its usage. So that was the first thing. But I think before then, I started thinking about this in about 2008. And you know, you see stuff on TV, you see stuff on Oprah Winfrey, and people are talking about, you know, it means this, it means that. But you always get this sense, you turn off the TV, you finish the interview, and you never really figured out what it's about, what happened, what did I learn? Did I learn anything? So I really started doing this project just so I can have some answers to my questions. So let's just go ahead and get started. So I want to think about this, first of all, the title, The Recency Illusion. What does that mean? Well, the recency illusion is the belief that a word or language usage is new when really is not new, it's old. So one good example is the word axe. People think that that's new, that the pronunciation used to be ask, and then they changed it later. Fact is, you look into the history of the English language, you find out that axe is very old, hundreds of years old. And the other part of the recency illusion is that it's not just about words. It could be anything that you think is new, but is really old. Another way you could describe it is Columbusing, you know, when you discover something that was already there. So in other words, it's just new to you. Some examples that came to my mind are just some terms like twerking and pimp my ride, you know, that have come about in the media recently. But man, we was talking about pimping all kinds of stuff, pimping and punking people, pimping rides, and long before MTV came out with these ideas. These phenomena are not new. It's just that people think that they're new. Let me see if I can go ahead and click here. Okay, here we go. Sorry. So what I'd like to do quickly is just share with you. We'll just hang on one second because a couple more people are coming in. Hey, Johnny, how you doing? So what I wanted to do with you is just share with you. So we're talking about this recency illusion, and stuff that you think is new is not new. But here's what people have said about the N-word. So the first thing that I want to do is share with you something that was on Oprah Winfrey. And this is Jay-Z and Oprah talking about the N-word. So let's see if I can get this thing to play. Can everybody hear me okay?
We love the new apartment.
Can you hear this?
There's a bit of a clogging problem.
At least Geico makes it easy to bundle our renters and car insurance.
For bundling made easy, go to geico.com.
We have to endure the commercials. Okay, so now notice what Jay-Z says about the N-word and why he thinks Black people use the word.
You know, I've been known for not being a big fan of rap music because of misogynist lyrics and because of the use of the N word. You obviously feel differently, and
A little bit.
a little bit, and tell everybody why.
What we discussed is more words. People give words power.
Yeah.
You know, and for our generation, what we did was we took the word and we took the power out of that word.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we turned a word that was very ugly and hurtful into a term of endearment. So, I mean, even when someone says, there's still intention behind what you say.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty much took the power out of the word. Because if we just start removing words from the dictionary, just make up another word the next day, we don't address the problem. The problem is racism, right? That's really the problem.
So we disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I feel that way, because my generation and generations before me, obviously, coming up through the civil rights movement, and I am where I am because there was a generation before me that fought for civil rights, and that word carries such a sense of hatred and degradation. And I always think about, when I hear the word, even when I'm at the concert and people are, you know, screaming it at your concert, I think about Black men who were lynched, and that's the last word they heard. And so that comes from my generation.
Right.
Okay. So, okay, we agree to disagree.
No, which is a strong point, understandable.
Okay. I disagree.
Okay, so when you watch programs like that, so Jay-Z says several things. One thing that he says is that the word is new. The way Black people use the word is new. And he also says that Black folks use it as a term of endearment. The problem with this is that when people make these claims, they've never done any research. I mean, you have to be able to answer the question, okay, so if the meaning is new, then we got to be able to go back and find out what the original meaning was. Did Black people use it in slavery times? How did they use it? What were the meanings? Did those meanings change over time? You can't just make things up. But when you watch these programs, you get a lot of this. So what I wanted to do is find out the answers to these questions. So again, no one has really done any historical studies to find out if the meanings of the N-word are new, different, or if they really are a term of endearment. And then the other problem is that when you watch these programs, you see all kinds of focus on CNN and on Oprah, but you never have a linguist within 100 miles of doing this research or even providing any insights. So I think that's one of the contributions of linguistics, is that perhaps we can tackle this problem from that angle. All due respect to everyone else's opinions about the word. So let's just dig right into it. So the question is then, so how long have Black people been using the word nigga? Just since hip hop, since Snoop Dogg, since Richard Pryor? Well, if you dig into if you start searching around, you'll find 1859, there's a book called Our Nig, written by a Black author, Harriet Wilson, and the word was used at least 21 times by both white and Black characters alike. An autobiographical fiction narrative, rather, Incidents in Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs, a runaway slave, records the word 27 times in that work, and it was uttered 2 times by Black characters. That's interesting, 1861. And then of course, Jabari Asim's 2007 book lists several other texts going all the way back to 1832, where Black folks frequently refer to themselves and to each other as niggas. So we see this very old. Here's some examples from some of those texts. From Our Nig: "Get out, Pete. When you come in this shop again, let a nigga know it." So that's back in 1859. Notice that the way he uses the term, he's using it towards himself. Let a brother know, let a body know, let somebody know, let me know, right? All the way back in 1859. 1861, a Black girl, slave, was outwitting her white pursuers. And she said, whew, this nigga was too cute for him this time, referring to herself. Another example we have from the same text, black girl referring to another black girl, that nigga's always got the devil in her. So we see these usages going back hundreds of years. And of course we see fictional examples like Huckleberry Finn. You have characters like Nigga Jim. The word was used in Huckleberry Finn some 215 times. And of course, that usage has been challenged by many groups and of course, school districts and so forth. But the question is, do we have any evidence of real people using the word? Not Mark Twain characters, not Gone with the Wind. Do we have any historical attestation? Well, if you look in the first black newspaper called Freedom's Journal, published in 1825, they had an article in there lamenting the fact that black people use the word amongst themselves. So even the debate's not even new. Among black people, should we call each other nigga, going all the way back to 1825. A British actress named Fanny Kimball visited a plantation in the 1850s, and after her visit, she reported that the black folks, the slaves on the plantation, were using the word amongst themselves, and even called the kids the little niggas on the plantation. And she said, no contemptuous intonation ever equaled the despotic insolence of this address, the word nigga, to each other. So she was saying that blacks were using it to each other. This is back in the 1800s. What about white folks? So we do have some evidence that white people use the N-word. So if you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, for example, I'll just read it. So remember, Malcolm used to be a pimp and a drug dealer before he joined the Nation of Islam. And in his autobiography, he told stories. So he used to hang out with this guy named Sammy the Pimp in Harlem or someplace. Anyhow, he said one of Sammy the Pimp's white women, known as Alabama Peach, a blonde, could put everybody in stitches with her southern drawl. And what made a lot of Negroes around the bar laugh the hardest was the way she would take 3 syllables to say the word nigga. But what she was saying was, I just love niggas. So what do we see here? We see a white woman from the South using the N-word among black people, and not facing any kind of reprisal or retribution. This is in the 1930s or 40s. That's the setting, New York City. I think it was New York. Anyhow, so Malcolm said, so how do we know she used it in a positive way? How do we know it wasn't a racial slur? She says, I love niggas. And the black men around the bar didn't take it offensively. It says they laughed the hardest, and it put everybody in stitches. So we're starting to get some clues here that black people and white people have been using the word nigga. And notice she didn't say ER, she said niggas. Have been using the word nigga in different ways, in different contexts, and for a long period of time. Okay. So maybe some of you have heard about the ex-slave recordings. Excuse me, if you haven't, the ex-slave recordings are, so in the 1930s and 40s, some researchers wanted to interview people who used to be slaves here in the United States. And so what they did is they took these tape recorders and they started audio recording people to get their stories. You know, what was it like? What was slavery like? What was the Civil War like? What's it like to be free? And they would ask them these questions and they tell these stories. And you can listen to these stories for free at the libraryofcongress.gov, and I provided the link for you here. What I wanted to do is find out in these recordings, and by the way, these recordings represent the only audio recorded speech of people who used to be in bondage, who used to be slaves. all of these other items that we talked about are either works of fiction, like Gone with the Wind, and so forth, or their text. But we can hear these voices. So for me, as a researcher, I said, I wonder if some of these folks use the word nigga in their conversations with these interviewers. It's possible that they don't, or that they won't. They're talking to white people. It's a formal setting, the tape recorders. Possible that they do. And I found out that they do. So let me show you just a couple of examples from the ex-slave recordings. So this is by Miss Irene Williams, recorded in 1940. She says, he, you gonna outshine all them niggas in Oak Grove Church today. Yes, ma'am, you sure is gonna outshine us all. So notice she talks about all them niggas in Oak Grove Church. Now, when we start looking at some of these real examples, what I encourage you to do, we wanna figure out what the meaning is. How did the speaker use the term nigga in that particular context? Some people will argue, oh, it's always a racial slur, it's always bad. Or other people might say, oh, when black people use it, it's always positive. Let's just see what the context says. And if you can substitute some other word for nigga and it fits just perfectly, then that's what the speaker meant. So when we look at this example, you're gonna outshine all them niggas in church today, outshine all them folks, all them people, right? Who is she referring to? She even includes herself, outshine us all, as one of the church members. And notice she's talking about church members. Clearly, she's not using it as a racial slur. Another example here, 1941, Miss Laura Smiley, all the niggas gathered round to see the old master again. And the old master didn't tell you, they was free. It's talking about Juneteenth, because she's from Texas. So notice she says, all the niggas gathered round. In this context, all the people, or all the slaves, they gathered round to see the old master. And by the way, she said master, which was an interesting pronunciation. But again, we see that people who were enslaved used to use the word nigga, and we're getting an idea of the context and how they used it. Okay, so let's take an assessment of what we're learning here. So there's an abundance of evidence that shows that, one, Black people have used the word for centuries. So that's a fact that escapes the notice of people who say, oh, it's new, this is a hip hop generation, Tupac. It ain't about Snoop Dogg, it's old. We also see that the word in these examples being used with several different meanings early on in the 1800s, and to refer to different people, including oneself. We see that the word was used by whites with positive meanings. It was used by women towards themselves, women towards other women. They use it to refer to the children. Remember, the kids as little niggas. And it was used to reference both individuals and groups. So remember, all the niggas gathered round, right? So we're starting to see a mosaic, a picture emerge that the word had several different usages and meanings, and it has for quite some time. So just stay with me here. You say, okay, Samantha, that's all well and good. But if the word nigga is such a bad word, why would any self-respecting Black person ever use it to refer to oneself or to another Black person? Well, if so if you think about it, it shouldn't surprise us at all. Because when the slaves came to the New World, that's what they were called. They were called niggas. You niggas get down off of that boat. Put those niggas up on the auction block. They heard the word nigga when they came to the New World, and those who were born here in the New World heard it from babyhood, from the earliest childhood. That's what slaves were called everywhere. They didn't call you by your last name. And unlike the book tells, the stories tell us, Kunta Kinte, and Toby rather wasn't what was beat into us, it was the word nigger. So given those circumstances, and there was no politically correct social movements saying that you shouldn't say this word and it's not a good word to say. So if you say that Black people adopted the word nigger intentionally, that's like saying that a child whose parents call him John and he refers to himself as John, that he's adopted the name John. That's not true. He calls himself John because that's what his mama called him. If she had called him Billy, he'd call himself Billy. And that's why Black people early on during slavery time referred to themselves as niggers. Not just in the United States either. So we see some examples of words that are similar to nigger in other languages across the colonial world. So when you look at Louisiana French Creole, mon nègre, nègre comes from French word meaning Black, right? Mon nègre and means my friend. Cher petit nègre, little boy, dear little boy. And in Haitian Creole, the word nègre can refer to a human being of any race. So in Haitian Creole, you can have a nègre noir, which is a Black dude, or a nègre blanc, which is a white dude. And so we see here that the word nègre in this language has been completely delinked from any racial connotation. As a matter of fact, Jesse Jackson, when he visited Haiti, was referred to as a nègre blanc. In other words, just a foreigner in that language. And of course, if you're familiar with other languages like Spanish, you know that mi negro is a term of endearment that a husband and wife will use to each other. This means sweetie pie, sweetheart, and so forth. And I've provided some other examples too. I'd like to take this time briefly just to point out that in this regard, the word nigger is not any different than any other word that's changed meanings, or that's even changed meanings from negative to positive or positive to negative, or from neutral to some evaluative meaning. For example, you look into the history of English, the word villain used to just mean somebody who lived in a village. But because the villagers were used to routinely, at least it was perceived that they did, would rob the country people, they say, here come those villains. And now the word villain has only a negative connotation. The word hussy comes from the word housewife originally. We know that the word you guys in American English used to refer only to a group of males, but we know that now it can refer to a group of males and females, a group that's all females, and we know that even a female can use it to refer to all females. This is very normal. Languages change like this in this particular way. The word nigger is not unique. So I just want to make this point because some find it difficult to believe, and they will argue with you hand and foot. No, it's a racial slur. I don't want to hear it. No, that's not true. And in fact, in this regard, the word nigger is behaving just like any other noun because it is a noun. Okay, so what do we learn here? We'll take a pause. So the use of nigger is not the result of some new ultra conscious, cutting edge young people who have taken it to make a socio-political statement. No, it's old. It goes back to slavery times. We've seen evidence that similar terms are used all across the colonial world that was involved in the slave trade. French, Spanish, Portuguese, and other Pidgin and Creole languages. And there's a radical continuity between American English and Black people in this country and Blacks all across the colonial world. It's not an accident that we all have a word that means something like nigger or my nigger, and that it has many meanings, including meanings of a term of endearment. Some people say, well, okay, Smith, that's all well and good, but see, and there's a typo here. I don't say nigger, I say nigga, and that's different. Well, so let's dig into that. What is the difference between the word when it's pronounced with an ER and when it's pronounced with an A? Is there a difference? Do they mean different things? Why do we have two different pronunciations in the first place? One of the reasons why we want to answer this question is because some people claim that the ER is always a racial slur, but the A version is positive, especially when it's used by Black people or by younger hip hop, generation. What we want to find out is that true? Well, without even looking at any data, we can already problematize that idea, and we can challenge it. So you think about the civil rights movement, and you have old racist Eugene Bull Connor and Governor George Wallace. Remember those guys? And they'd be on TV. We don't want no niggas here in Alabama, Birmingham, and Mississippi. Notice these men didn't say nigger. They said nigga because they're Southern. They're Southerners. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So we know that the word nigga is not always positive. Here's your proof. At the same time, we've also already considered some evidence that among white folks, even Southern whites, that the word nigga is not always negative. It can be positive. Remember Alabama Peach, right? I just love niggas. Okay. So why do we have two pronunciations in the first place? Well, first we have to talk a little bit about the history of English. So we know that the colonists who settled in Jamestown in 1607, they used to pronounce their R's. In England, they used to pronounce the R's. So in 1619, John Rolfe famously wrote, remember the first 20 Black folks that came off that boat, he referred to them as 20 niggers. Probably at that time, they pronounced it with the R. Now, independently, England stopped pronouncing their R's over time, especially after a vowel. So a word like cart, they began to pronounce it like caught, a caught. And for reasons of prestige, this pronunciation was propagated throughout the American South. How? Well, we know that the American and Southern plantation owners bought and sold slaves in England. They educated their children there. And they began to listen to the British talk, these British aristocrats, and they used to view the speech as they liked it. It was prestigious. And so they began to copy this speech, and they brought it back to America. So they began saying stuff like sugar and brother and cornbread. Notice they're taking the R away after a vowel. Pork chops, Southern, and nigger. So notice brother, sugar, mother, nigger. Nigger is no different than any of these words where the R has been taken away after a vowel. Another piece of this pie here that we want to talk about is, now you have to remember that until World Wars I and II, almost all Black people lived in the South. 90%, that's just about everybody. And then of course, to escape domestic terrorism, racism, and in search of jobs, and the boll weevil had destroyed cotton crops in the South. Black people left the South. There was nothing there for them except a bunch of trouble. So they began to migrate north into these cities. And if you think about it, places like Philadelphia and Cleveland and Buffalo and Chicago, they didn't be chocolate cities. They were full of white European working class immigrants until this great Black migration happened. This was the largest inland migration that the country has ever seen. Some 2 million Black people moved north. But mind you, since the majority of US Blacks were Southerners, they shared many linguistic characteristics with Southern whites. And so as we talked about a little bit earlier, that's why white folks and Black folks in the South may pronounce the word nigger as nigger. Now in the North, mind you, which except for a few places in the Northeast, the North didn't lose their R's. They still pronounce the R's. So now in the North, you have another term, which is nigger, competing with the term nigga. So now you have blacks who have moved to these cities with their Southern pronunciation, nigga. And remember, black people have been using the term since slavery days. And then of course, when they moved to the to northern cities, they were confronted with this other pronunciation, nigger. So now we have two competing forms here. An interesting point is made by Wolfram and Schilling Estes. They make a point about the Great Black Migration, that basically when Black Americans began to move, excuse me, from the rural areas to the northern cities, a lot of their dialect features were misinterpreted as not being Southern features, but as being Black features. And see, that's one of the main reasons why people believe that the word nigga is really a marker of ethnic identity, that it's a Black pronunciation, when really, as we've highlighted here, it's really a Southern pronunciation. And if you want to be even more exact, historically, it's British. You say, well, man, the pronunciation, okay, and the meanings, if all of this stuff is really old, then why do some people think that all of this is new? Well, I think this is really what the whole crux of this discussion is about. The recency illusion, right? The idea that you think something is new when in fact it's long established. So I argue in a recent paper that one reason why many may view it as a recent reclaiming is that, see, this, once Black people moved north, see, this is the first time that ever really been around, northern whites had ever really been around Blacks. The country was segregated until very recently. And even now, we experience de facto residential segregation. Just go to Philadelphia. You've got the white neighborhood, Black, Italian, Irish, Puerto Rican, Chinatown. Even today, cities and schools are as segregated as ever before. So when comedians like Red Fox and Richard Pryor and Moms Mabley and Paul Mooney started using the word nigga in their comedy records, see, they used it because Black people have been using it forever. They weren't doing anything new and novel and cutting edge. They were just continuing a long, unbroken chain of usage in Black speech communities. On the other hand, though, this was the first time that white people had been exposed to this, because now you've got these records, they're selling the comedy albums, and they're watching Richard Pryor stand up live on TV and in movies. It's the first time that large white audiences had been exposed to what otherwise was in-group Black communication and Black speech. Hence, you know, so you have this idea that it's new, it's novel. Wait a minute, what are these people doing? It's not new. It's just, it's new to you. And then of course, about the 80s and certainly into the 90s and early 2000s, rap music, hip hop entered into the mainstream on the radio, music videos, concerts, the internet, blaring out of car windows. Then later in the children's television shows, TV commercials, college courses on hip hop. The word nigga began to reach even wider audiences, including middle-class, suburban whites, Latinos, Asians, so forth. So this created parents and grandparents were dismayed, and they drew a lot of many incorrect inferences about the meaning of the word nigga. But the fact is that this, in many ways, this was the first time that white audiences and Blacks' public use of the word collided. And since many whites didn't have real access to Black people or to their speech communities, as we mentioned, due to historical and present day segregation, they only understood the word nigger to be used as a racial slur. See, they'd never been around so many ways in which it could be used. At least that I argue that that's the case for many northern whites. I think a lot of southern whites have always used the word in many different ways, as we got a glimpse from Alabama Peach as an example earlier. So let's just take a stock here. So one, we know we saw that many blacks and whites in the South used the form nigga, not nigger. Historically, nigga and nigger have the same roots. And we only think that black usage is different from white usage because of perceived differences in pronunciation and perceived differences in meaning. And so we want to pause here to say that we don't want to engage in this kind of stereotyping and categorical perception. We want to dig deep into the historical and linguistic data to really find out what's really going on. So that's kind of what I did. So I would like to kind of shift gears here and direct you to the study that I did that I think that goes more in depth into some of these questions. So what did I do? So remember, we want to see, has the word changed? Is it different? How do people use it today? How did they use it then? So what I did is I looked at 1,099 examples of the word nigga. I found them on Facebook and Twitter. And I also used the ex-slave recordings. And there were 79 cases of the word nigga in the ex-slave recordings. I divided the data, excuse me, into blacks, whites, males, and females. And some of the written variants of the word nigga included ER, nigga, nicka, nucka, nig, ninja, and so forth. And again, we want to say, how do people use it? So, and I'll talk about each of these in just a second. So what I did is I looked at the word nigga in its context. Did it occur with an adjective? What kind of an adjective? The noun of address. Are you talking to someone or are you talking about someone? What was the race of the speaker? The gender of the speaker? How did they use it? Who were they referring to? Themselves or someone else? And I put all of that into a statistical program that analyzes linguistic data to see which of these factors, when they're all taken to considered together, has the most, the strongest impact on a speaker's propensity to use the word nigga. Let's keep in mind, and I think Arthur Spears is absolutely right when he says, just on its face, the word nigga is neutral. It's evaluatively neutral. Like other words, bitch, motherfucker, hoe, he says, and I say this based on empirical observation of speech behavior. The feelings, wishes, and opinions of individuals are not what determines speech. Speech used in communities is out of the hands of social commentators and moral guardians. And some uses of language and of specific words develop in certain ways, whether we like it or not. So Arthur Spears also says, so when we evaluate Black language, we shouldn't always evaluate it negatively. We should really just ask, can I approach this free of any bias and examine how the speech is being used in that speech community by those speakers. So that's what I would like you all to do today. Put on your linguistics hat. You're going to be linguists for the next maybe 20 minutes or so. Approach it as neutrally. We want to be a neutral, objective, dispassionate, and we just want to hold it up to the light and kick the tires and check the hood. We want to see the way the word is being used by speakers. So let's try to do that. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you some of the factors that I coded for And as we do that, we go through this exercise, look at the examples. Ask yourself, what is the meaning? How do I know that that's the meaning? Is it being used in a positive, neutral, or a negative way? Can I substitute some other word and still extract that same meaning? So let's try not to go in with the preconceived notion that either A, it's always a racial slur, it's always a bad word, or B, well, if a Black person is using it, it's always good. Let's take those evaluations and put them to the side, and let's just see what the data tell us. Let the data inform our analysis as analysts. So we're going to be the analysts. So linguists have identified three main broad meanings of the N-word: positive ones, negative ones, and so-called neutral ones. We'll talk about those. So if you look at some of these examples of positive usage, it says, nice pick, my nig, or I'd rather chill with 99 real niggas than one fake one. This one female says, 2 years ago, I gave my phone number to this sexy light-skinned nigga. He must have been homeless because he never called me back. I love my nigga. I wouldn't trade him in with all of his flaws. Then we even have an example from the ex-slave recordings. Notice this one. Referring to his slaves, my niggas, they can have what they want. Yes, sir, he says. Examples of so-called neutral meanings. In other words, like there was a bunch of niggas at the party, simply meaning people. Notice the ex-slave recordings. All his niggas had a common education, all of them. All the niggas gathered around to see the old master again. See, this isn't, positive, it's not negative, it's just all the people. Happy 420, make sure you niggas are safe, and so forth. An example of negative meanings, so-and-so is a bitch-made nigga. So notice that's negative. This is uttered by a Black female. Here's another example. Ignorant little nigga. Here's another. The truth only hurts bitch niggas. And I told you, unfollow that nigga. So notice we see, excuse me, that there are, that the word nigga can be used with a variety of meanings, positive, negative, and even referential, neutral, just simply describing somebody. With regard to who the word can refer to, remember, we saw examples where you can use the word to refer to other people, but also the word nigga can be used to describe oneself. So here's one example from Facebook. Somebody please come save a nigga. The guy was very bored. Who is a nigga in this case? Myself. Come get me out of here. Pick me up. Take me to the mall. Get me on board. I also tested whether or not, so if you use the word as a noun of address, does the meaning change? So if I'm talking to you or about you, does that change the meaning? So here's some examples. Y'all niggas better hit me up. I'm ready to make that Oklahoma trip soon, cuzzo. Happy Father's Day, big bro. Here's another example. Nigga, you just gay, period. So here the speaker is addressing somebody. In the first example, the way the word is used is clearly just neutral. Hey, you dudes, pick me up. The second example, you could argue that it's being used in a negative way, or it could be neutral. I also looked at whether or not the word nigga occurred with some sort of an adjective, because an adjective may tell you what the noun, what the speaker means when he or she's using that noun. Gives you some extra information. So the first type of adjective I want to look at are demonstratives. So a demonstrative is a word like this or that. So in other words, in English, this table is closer to the speaker than that table, right? These are pointing words. But you can also use the words this and that to create distance, emotional distance, and social distance with a person. So it's not literal, it's metaphorical. For example, you can say, I don't like that smell. Or Bill Clinton famously said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Notice he called her that woman. He's putting distance. Interestingly, in Black English, this and that can have, in some ways, the opposite meanings than they do in standard American English. In other words, the word this can be used to express exasperation, while that can be used in a positive way. So, for example, this nigga damn near gave me a heart attack. See, she's exasperated. Or, man, that nigga John is cool. In this case, the term that is being used in a positive way. Yeah, so also the other type of adjective you could use is a possessive, so a word like mine or your or his. So we know that the expression my nigga, that's the one that everybody talks about, my nigga. That's like the epitomized example of the term of endearment. Of course, as we've seen that the word nigga can be used with all sorts of different other adjectives and words besides the word mine. But here's some examples of mine. So my nigga, if it rains, you got the day off, just letting you know. Nice pick, my nig. And a Black female on Twitter says, Dr. Phil is my nigga. So we see there's different uses here. And even going back to the slave recordings, notice what this slave owner says. And to Miss Scolton, he says, yes, I do, for my niggas and my money. So notice he's equating something of value, two things of value, my niggas and my money. Here's some other examples from the ex-slave recordings. Jefferson Davis told Miss Colyarn, say, Miss Colyarn, I'm going home tomorrow. Don't forget to feed my niggas, meaning my slaves. And when they get through laying by the crops, you let them be, but don't disturb them. I want them undisturbed. See, anything happen to any of my Negroes, we see Mr. Davis. And don't forget, I'm Mr. Davis. See, my Negroes is my summer shade. He's my winter fire. He's my umbrella, as reported by George Johnson, who was a former slave of Jefferson Davis. And finally, George Johnson also reported they opened up a nice school, educated all his niggas, and made my father a civil engineer. And then he made Isaiah Montgomery his bookkeeper, still talking about Jefferson Davis. So notice he educated all of his niggas. So we're using the possessive pronoun there. So I looked at all possessive pronouns, not just my nigga, but his nigga, your nigga, their nigga, everything, to see if they behaved differently, if the word changed meanings based on the type of pronoun that it co-occurred with. And of course, I looked at all kinds of other adjectives. For example, Corey, you're a real nigga in my eyes. So notice that's a positive use. Next example, TGIF, thank God it's Friday for you slow niggas. Probably negative. The last one, I'm still the same nigga, but I'm evolving though. I'm still the same dude, still the same old guy that you always known. Probably a neutral meaning, right? So we can see from the context. And I want to emphasize that context is extremely important in deciphering or decoding what the meaning of the word nigga is. And it's not just the adjective that it occurs with. How do we know that? So I'd like to quickly show you 5 examples of the word nigga being used with the same adjective. In this case, it's the adjective little. Notice that the meaning changes, even though it's the same adjective. And so the only way that you can interpret the meaning is by looking at the broader context. So woman talking about her child, she says, my little nigga going to, had his picture, my little nigga going to the 4th grade, badass. And she means badass mildly disparagingly and just kidding around with his little bad self. I don't need ADT home security system. So the guy had a picture of like a little chihuahua. He says, this little nigga warned you about everything. He's talking about his watchdog, not even talking about a human in this case. But notice, well, we'll look at the third example. Can't no nigga call me little nigga is disrespectful to my hustle. So you notice the first two examples could be characterized as either positive or neutral. While the third example, little nigga, the person would view it as disrespectful. Another two examples, a girl was babysitting or watching a child and the baby didn't want to go to sleep. So she says, if this little nigga would go to sleep, that'd be awesome. I'm sleepy too. She had a bunch of smiley faces and hearts and stuff. So even though she was aggravated that she was not able to go to sleep and that the child wouldn't go to sleep, she still was referring to a baby. And we also know that she put little heart emojis and stuff. And so I coded this usage as positive. How could you code it as anything else? And this one is clearly positive. Happy birthday, little nigga. Hope you enjoy your day. So, so the coding decisions that were made made on the basis on what type of co-occurring adjective or element was with the word nigga, but also the larger context. So this is what the results of the study show. There was a lot of stuff in this study. We can't go through all of it. We can talk about it afterwards if you'd like, or you can certainly read the paper. I'm just gonna hit some of the highlights so we don't keep you here all doggone day. So remember, we had 1,100 cases of nigga. Now, if you look at table 1, it shows the distribution, the count of nigga by gender and by race. So the columns show blacks, whites, and other, and then the rows are females and males. Notice that black folks take up the lion's share of the data, followed by whites, and black males utter the word in these data more than any other group. But when you look at the distributions of nigga by its 3 broad meanings, okay, so you notice here, so we have positive, neutral, and negative meanings as we read from left to right. Notice that neutral meanings make up the majority of meanings, followed by negative meanings, and then positive meanings taking up the rear. What does this tell us? That first of all, the word nigga is not being used primarily as a positive term of endearment. As a matter of fact, when you look at, when you add neutral and negative meanings together, they tell you that 70% of the time, the word nigga is not being used in a positive way. When you look at the distributions of the meanings of nigga by the adjective, so is it my nigga, this nigga, that nigga, little nigga, dumb nigga, whatever, and all of those are attested in the data. What do we find? So if you look at the 3 columns on the right, so the data are divided up by positive, neutral, and negative meanings again, dark blue, regular blue, and light blue. Notice that when nigga is a bare noun, it occurs with no adjective whatsoever. Its meanings are mainly neutral. When it appears with a demonstrative, this or that, and of course, you can divide the data, you can split the data by this and that. We can talk about that later if you want to. We find that we have more negative meanings, followed by neutral, and then positive. However, when you have a possessive like my, and this is when we would predict this, that my nigga has a lot of positive meanings, but you can also express other meanings with the use of my. So for example, you see right here in the middle, these neutral meanings, the vast majority of those were those slave, ex-slave recordings meanings where he said, you know, make sure you feed my niggas and don't disturb my niggas. Just using the word, the term my niggas is in a referential sense. But I also found 6 cases of where the expression my nigga was actually negative. So we saw earlier, so-and-so is a bitch made nigga. And later the speaker says, don't get your ass whooped, my nigga. Notice the term here, my nigga, is not being used as a positive term of endearment. In fact, it's just the opposite. Yeah, so what about race? So again, we see the distributions of nigga by speaker, race, and gender. So if you look at the far left here, you see Black folks. What do you notice? Black people are primarily not using the word as a positive term of endearment. In fact, that the positive meaning is only used 25% of the time. So when Black people use the word, at least according to these data, it is 75% of the time it is not being used as a term of endearment. That's what the data show. Don't blame me, I'm just trying to explain it. I mean, this is what the data show. It turns on its head what our conventional ideas are about the word and who uses it. And mind you, even Black folks like Jay-Z and so forth have believed the recency illusion and believed the myth. But the thing is when you observe people when they don't know you're observing them, then we can get an idea into how they speak. And that's the value, I think, of looking at the data in this way. Just taking these examples and just seeing what people do when they're not being observed by me. Whites, on the other hand, have the highest proportion of positive usage. And then if you look over at males and females, we see that males and females pattern differently as well. So one of the important things I want to point out here is Black people and white people don't pattern the same. Presumably, a lot of these people may listen to hip hop music. You would think that they would use the term in similar ways if they're all part of this hip hop community. So we're talking about the stereotypes and the myths about who uses the term and under what circumstances. But even if you prove that to be true, we find that they still pattern differently, raising many questions about Black and white usage and the speech communities that they are a part of. Who are their caregivers and what schools that they go to and so forth. Now, if you just take this expression, my nigga, and you just isolate my nigga, what we find, so you see the red box there, white males have a higher proportion of tokens of my nigga than any other group. And white males, so 25.4%, and white females also have higher rates, 18.3%, than Blacks, either male or female. So notice Black males and females hover around 13 and 14%. So we see that white folks use the term my nigga at higher rates, at higher proportions than Blacks do. And if you look at the thing that's circled right there, this is in spite of the fact that you have a higher number of tokens of the word nigga in the data, and you have a higher amount of, so you see 92 cases of my nigga versus 72 produced by whites. But whites have a higher percentage of using the term my nigga, which is revealing. Also, I just wanted to quickly show you the data with regard to referent. So who are you referring to? So remember, first person is yourself, second person is the person you're talking to, third person is somebody else, and then generic is like, if you want to say like, niggas today, niggas in general. Predictably, so if you look at the third person category, you notice that you have more, it's about the same, but you have a higher percentage of negative usage. And then if you go all the way back to to the right side, first person, when you're talking about yourself, you know, a nigga need a job. Notice those, when you're talking about yourself, it's more neutral. You're talking to somebody, second person, it's positive. And when you're talking about somebody else, you get more negative. And that's almost predictable. And then what was really interesting too was the generic niggas today. Notice you get neutral and negatives and not very many positives. Well, because people on Facebook and Twitter, they like to rant and you know, women may be talking about how niggas are today, or people may be talking about niggas today need to do this and need to do that. And so we tend to find more neutral and positive or negative meanings. So finally, what do we learn? Well, we find that niggas meanings, they vary. It depends on the context, depends on who you're talking to, depends on the race and gender of the speaker. We also learned that nigga is not primarily associated with positive meanings for any group. We found that blacks and whites did not pattern the same. And we find that black people use the term not primarily as a term of endearment. Instead, they use it more with neutral and followed by even negative meanings, and that the term of endearment usage is last on the list. Another interesting thing that was in the data is that black females and some white females also use the term nigga to just mean a male, a man or a boyfriend. Here's some examples. I want to take a nigga out instead of a nigga taking me out. So I want to take a guy out. I'm going to take a man out instead of a man paying for my meal. I want to take him out, right? A guy says, no, a woman says here, no nigga is perfect. So don't be coming with a list of stuff that a nigga better be and a nigga better have. And one woman says, don't no nigga come before my kids. A man does not come before my kids. A boyfriend, my kids come first. So notice, so we do see a difference in the way men and women use the term nigga. So again, 75% of the time, black people are not using the term as a word as a term of endearment. Excuse me, and the higher rates of positive meanings among whites may reveal something about in-group and out-group status. So the facts that white males use the term my nigga at exaggeratedly higher rates than blacks, and by the way, those differences were statistically significant, it may indicate that they're putting on, trying to fit in by hyper-correcting and using expressions that appease or mollify the black friends, trying to be cool. So, to conclude, so the historical data provides sufficient evidence that nigga has been able to express a range of meanings going all the way back to the early days into the 19th century. Positive, neutral, and negative meanings. And these meanings can be so-called meanings. They can mean people, folks, slaves, children. And we also see that going all the way back to the 1800s, nigga has always referred to different people, including yourself. You could be using it to talk to someone else. You could talk about a third person. Those uses going all the way back and today could be singular or plural. They could index males, females, children, groups of people. As we saw, it was used by males and females far back as the 1800s. We also saw white women, Southern white women using the word with a positive connotations, using it in an all-black context, and not facing any retribution, if you will. So then all of this stuff conspires to one conclusion that I can think of, is that niggas' wide use, range of uses and reference and context going all the way back since the early days, and many of those contexts and meanings and reference and uses still exist today. It argues against any recent change and abrupt changes of meaning. There is no evidence to suggest that this long tradition of use and usage has been interrupted, or has significantly changed, or that Black people have recently or abruptly repackaged it, changed it up, flipped the script, or reappropriated, reclaimed it somehow. That's not what the evidence shows. It's not what the data show. So for this reason, I've argued that this mistaken belief, which I've borrowed the term from Arnold Zwicky, the recency illusion, or Columbusing, it must be attributed to some other reason.
Mhm.
It's not new. There's got to be some other reason why people think it's new. So it's my position that this stereotyped perception about niggas' use and meanings has not been the result of linguistic processes alone, but has developed because of mass migrations of human beings and disproportionate influence that the media and public figures have had in reinforcing the idea that these are two separate words, one Black, one white, two pronunciations, and two distinct meanings. Additionally, the reappropriation myth is fueled by the fact that we really, up until recently, we haven't had any studies by linguists. Or even when you look at the news programs, they never have any linguists, and certainly not any Black language scholars in the public domain who've done the research and who can also bring their experiences, because you really need both. To bring to bear ideas and explanations surrounding these questions. It's always been dominated either by entertainers, and mind you, they have a right to their opinion, but the fact is, what is the evidence? We certainly want to look at evidence. What I'd like to do is just leave you with something. And then if you want to have a question and answer, we can. One thing that I probably should have said at the outset is, although I have my personal opinion about whether or not Black people should use it, whether or not white people should use it, and so on and so forth, that's not the job of a linguist. Should people use the word? That's not even a linguistic question. It's not a scientific question. I'll leave that to other people. I want to just share with you Richard Pryor, because he was famous for using the word, and he's also famous for stopping using the word after he took a trip to Africa. He came back to Africa. He said, "Oh, I'm never using that word again." It's about 2 minutes, and then I'll finish with that. But I'm going to leave you with Richard here.
And I was sitting in the hotel, and a voice said to me, he said, "Look around, what do you see?" And I said, "I see all colors of people doing everything." And the voice said, "Do you see any niggas?" I said, "No." I said, "No, why? Because there aren't any." And it hit me like a shot, man. I started crying. I've been in 3 weeks. I haven't even said it. I haven't even thought it. And it made me say, "Oh my God, I've been wrong. I ain't gonna never call another Black man a nigga." Because we never was no niggas. That's a word that's used to describe our own wretchedness. We perpetuate it now because it's dangerous. That word's dead. We men and women, we come from the first people on the earth. The first people on the earth were Black people. Because anthropologists, white anthropologists. So let's look through it. Yeah, Dr. Leakey and them found people remains 5 million years ago in Africa, for what it's worth. I know I ain't trying to get something over. I'm just talking about. And I don't want them hip white people coming to me telling me to help. I don't like it. I'm just telling you, it's comfortable to me. I don't like it when black people say it to me. I really don't no more. It's nothing. It don't mean nothing. So I love y'all. Take that with you. I guess y'all say.
Thank you. That's it.
Good job, man.
How you doing, Johnny?
Doing all right. I
Hey,
didn't know if you were hearing me coughing in the background or not, man. It's been rough.
well, you heard me coughing in the foreground.
I know. I'm worried about you, homie.
No, I'm okay. I've had this one for about 20 years.
Yeah, I know. You've always done that.
I'm gonna stop the recording here.